So, but I just wanted to we kind of wanted to lay I know we talked a lot about that. We wanted to lay the background of like, who are millennials? What are they about? What do they grow up with? What's going on?
Mhm.
So let's get to the meat and potatoes, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Uh, if you don't mind.
So so in our outline, this is worded probably very poorly. I guess maybe a better way to say it is, why are millennials responding the way they are to the church? In terms of
Yeah.
why are millennials just not that interested? And some of this is going to sound very critical. We don't mean it that way, because we get it, right? Like, millennials are a very unique generation. And so, like, for you boomers and Gen Xers that like invested time and energy into us and still do, like, we love you so much for that, because it must have been really hard navigating, trying to invest in a generation that was so dramatically different than yours. So really, hats off to you.
Yeah, and we mean that sincerely. Like, I know that sounds like
Yeah.
a kind of like a, oh, try to get some grace back from them, but like, no, we mean that. Like, I had some really good leaders that were Gen Xers, and I wouldn't be a Christian without them. But
Yeah.
appreciate you navigating with us. If you could just make sure that, like, in the general culture war thing, you could continue to keep that spirit and help your peers keep that spirit, that would help us out a lot.
Well, because that's like one of the first things on here, right, that we wrote down, which
Yeah.
is that millennials really value conversation, especially about hard and uncomfortable topics.
Well, we're not afraid of it. It's
And
normal. We like learning
yeah,
stuff. So, like, that challenge is
mhm,
okay with us. It's not
yeah,
threatening.
we grew up having those hard conversations and very uncomfortable conversations. We talked about stuff we didn't want to talk about, but we had to, because it's
Yeah.
just how life is.
I watched on repeat plane crash into 2 buildings, like 2 planes crash into, you know what I mean? Like, that's like, I
Yeah,
was 9. Like,
right. Yeah, we had to grow up pretty fast in that regard. But this is, I think, an aspect that churches can get hung up on. So, if I could say something encouraging, I want to say this. Especially this last year with how political things have gotten, I think one of the struggles for churches is the feel, and I'm saying this as a pastor, so this is also talking with myself, of feeling like if you're going to have a conversation, you have to have a conclusion to the conversation. And so you can't just have an open forum, everyone talking. Like, there, you have to be going somewhere. You have to have a set objective, a lesson you're trying to teach, or something like that. That's not really what we're saying here. What millennials really value is just having the conversation. You don't have to come to a conclusion. Just sometimes we just want to talk about something.
mhm.
Like, sometimes Jordan and I talk about things that are divisive, even between us. If we don't come to a conclusion, we just want to talk about it, and that's fine, I think, to do in a church. Like, just have the conversation. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it that way, but I think that's true, that you don't have to come to a conclusion when you're having an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
Just have it. And I do think that's where millennials tend to deviate, because we don't have to walk away with an answer. Sometimes we just want to walk away with more questions, if anything. But that's just my thought. I don't know what feedback you have
No, I
in
think
regards to that.
that's probably really good, and I think we'll just be specific. We want to talk about the hard topics because that's the stuff that we're dealing with, and it's the
Yeah.
stuff that, like, we kind of just talked about. We're not really afraid to deal with. Not that we're saying like the boomers and Gen Xers are, but I'm just making an argument that it's probably more normative for us than it is for those 2 generations. So because of
Yes.
that, like, we want to have those conversations because, like, that's the stuff we've had to always deal with. We don't know how to live with ignoring it. Like, it's not possible for us.
Mhm.
Um, it's just the worldview we came up with
Yeah.
by
Like, we
our
hate
fault or
living with
not.
the elephant in the room.
Yeah, we
Like,
don't
let's
do
just
well
talk
with
about the
that.
elephant in the room. It's gonna be there one way or the other.
Exactly, exactly. And that's probably that task over time, right? We just can't wait it out and ignore it. Like, we just need to take care of it, be done with it. And I mean, part of that's like just the way we grew up, like busy schedules, got to be here, got to be here, got to be here, right? Get it done. Versus, like, yeah, well, you get the point. I'm not gonna beat a dead horse, but, like, you know, think about the media that's risen in our lifetime, Ben, and like how that, like, kind of highlights what we're talking about. Like, podcasts have become really viable, and like YouTube have become like really viable ways for
Mhm.
like education and superstardom and like the new things. And a lot of the people that do that do, like, not only comedy videos, but like the podcast, particularly, like hard, uncomfortable conversations and topics. And it's not like a
Yeah.
teaching thing. It's not like a lesson. It's not like like a self help book. It's not like that at all. It's like, we're just going to talk about and do reaction videos to this thing. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, we're just going to respond to it. how do we respond to it? And
Yeah.
sometimes I think our generation likes to watch others respond to it because we're trying to work out how we're responding to it.
Hmm.
And it's like a way to do that socially. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
So one thing that so this is a success failure story. If you want to hear it, Ben.
Yeah.
So my home church got a new pastor a while ago, well, years ago. He's not new now, but he was new then. And he would do this format where he would do talks instead of sermons, where he'd have someone come up and they
Mm,
just do Q&A. And I was like locked in, so excited. It's just like, yes. Because this is exactly what we're talking about, right? Like, let's just have the conversation. You got something difficult, right? So this was like 2016. So you know what was going on then. I'm not going to talk about it, but that was what's going on. And the
mm,
sad thing was this open conversation between two opposing sides came up. And then like kind of at the end, it had to have a conclusion. And it was a conclusion basically saying like, nothing. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna do that and you're gonna make it so you have to pick a side, pick a side. If not, just like explain it and say we're just gonna talk about it. Here's both sides, and then move forward, right? But like
mm.
I think for my generation, we were either hoping for boldness or hoping for like an actual question, something that we could think about and wrestle with, rather than some kind of like out, which is what that ended up being like. Vote what God tells you to vote, which I guess is true, fine, but like you know what I mean? Like it just felt very
Mm.
cop outy at that in that year. And it was a tough year. Like I think a lot of people were really struggling with the two candidates. They were, it was a weird year. But like my whole thing was like, why couldn't we just like talk about the issues and just talk about how Christian approaches both those, and that's the end of it. And you don't say,
Mm.
vote your conscience, like don't like that just was a cop out. It was a way for them to not have to like worry about offending people or talking about it, but then to be relevant to talk about it. So it was kind of this weird double standard. It felt really disingenuous and it just felt like a gimmick rather than an authentic conversation. So that really
Yeah.
bugged me. But like that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, like right, that hard, uncomfortable topic. If you're gonna have it, like go all in one way or the other. Like either just make it a question where we think about it and we leave and we have to like reflect on it, or like
Hmm.
just say what you're gonna say, but don't cop out. Does that make sense, Ben? Do you agree with that, or is that just me?
Yeah. No, I agree, and that leads to another point, which is authenticity,
Yeah.
specifically authenticity within community. Right.
Yeah.
I know we use this word a lot, and it is true. You can take being authentic to an extreme where authentic becomes the new hypocritical. Like people being like, "Oh, well, I'm just being authentic." And it's like, no, you're just making excuses for your sin. I sort of went on a tangent there,
No, I
but as it
mean,
relates to church,
yeah.
like we're just looking for churches that are authentic, and we don't mean authentic in like the hip form of authentic, like we're an authentic church. Like that's not what I mean. I mean just be your church. Like one of the things I loved about being a pastor at Gagetown is the people there. Like that church was just authentic. Like they didn't like try to emulate something else. They didn't try to be some hip, young, you know, super cool church. Like it was a church where a lot of the people were retirees or middle age, and that's just what the church was. And I loved it for that because you went there and you felt like you were talking to people, and you felt like you were worshiping as just an authentic church. Like they weren't trying to put on a mask or anything. And when it comes to churches, like when we walk into a Christian church, we want there to be a Christian experience. Like we don't want it to be like I don't know, like you're at a concert or something. So
Yes and no, but yes, I hear you.
yeah.
If it's
So
genuine, I think we would be okay with it. Like some places are like that, but I think our generation's really good at sniffing out when that's just like,
yes.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. But I want to come back around to a point that I'm trying to make that I'm doing a very poor job at. So when I was in college, I was taking a class on evangelism, and one day we went into class. There was a question, or not a question. There was a quote written on the board that said, "The worship service is for Christians, so you have to structure it towards Christians." And we had some interesting conversation around that. A lot of people didn't like that idea at first. They were like, well, I mean, the church is for everyone. Like anyone should be able to come into a Christian service, and they shouldn't be put off by us using, very strange terms or languages. Like we should be explaining everything, and we should be staying away from music and music styles that might seem foreign, and stuff like that. But then someone spoke up and was like, "Well, I actually think that thinking is wrong. I don't think that the worship service should be structured in a way that's easily approachable by outsiders. Because, for example, if I'm going into a mosque, I am going there to experience an authentic Muslim form of worship. But if I go in there and everyone is making special accommodations for me and they're changing the way that they do music or prayers so that it's more understandable for me, then I'm going to walk away from that being like, okay, well, did I really experience an authentic Muslim worship? No. And the same is true for the Christian church. And this is where I also want to encourage churches, like, be Christian. Like, don't be afraid of the terminology. Don't be afraid of some of the weird imagery, or like, I don't really know how to say this.
Well, no, I get what you're
Maybe you
saying.
could help me out here with what I'm trying to say.
No, you're saying like our generation's attracted to be authentic, so be authentically you. So if you're a church in Gagetown that's in a town full of retirees, that's full of
Yeah.
retirees, like it's a little weird for you to start playing like heavy rock music.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make any sense for multiple reasons. One, if someone in my generation walks in, they're going to be like, "That's weird." You know what I mean? Like that's not normal. That's not what I expect from this church. But two, like if you're downtown New York City, right? Like maybe that approach works because culturally that's what you guys like to do, and that's okay. That's being who you are. That's you being authentically yourself. So
Mhm.
what you're saying is like the church needs to be a community first before anything else, which means
Yeah.
it reflects its location. And I mean that.
Well,
That sounds so oversimplified, but I think it's true.
yeah. Well, I think there's actually two aspects to what we're trying to say
Okay.
here. One is, yes, being authentic to what your church is comprised of, right? Where you find yourself.
Yeah.
Be authentic to your context, but also you need to be authentically Christian.
Be authentic to what you say and
Yeah.
profess, not like. So,
Yeah.
are you? Can I just ask it if that's okay? Can I
So
just ask?
both of those would be true. Sorry, I should have
No, no,
clarified
you're
that
fine. Yeah.
I'm actually making 2 points. Yeah.
No. So how do you feel about the churches we grew up in with like all the seeker friendly stuff? Then
I don't know if I'd say the church has been corrupted with the seeker friendly stuff. I think it's been counterproductive.
I think for our generation, it has for sure.
Yes, definitely our generation. Seeker friendly does not. It's a bait and switch, is really what seeker friendly is, because you're inviting people in, being very welcoming. You're dumbing things down, which does not help provoke questions or conversations. You're just making something very easy to digest and trying to get people to make a commitment. And then once they make that commitment, eventually they're going to find out, oh, this is actually a lot different than what I was told it was going to be. Like, and that I think is the real fault, the real failure of seeker friendly churches, is that it's a bait and switch, in my
Hmm.
opinion, and in my experience, that's what it is.
Interesting.
Um, so it's very inauthentic. I don't know what your feedback to that is.
Yes, I don't know. So it's I'm so unqualified to have this conversation. I don't mean that to be mean, but like, dude, I mean, like, I work for a bank, man. Like, like, I participate in a church, and what drew me to the church was the sense of community.
Mhm.
We do the mega church, like, basically, we try to emulate Elevation. Like, that's the music style that my church tries to emulate. So they
Okay.
actually one time said like that if you want a small church with a mega church feel, like that vibe, like kind of trying to be with it, like in terms of music, like contemporary, like that, what people are listening to on the radio, like we'll give you that, but we'll also give you that small church, like intimacy vibe, which is part of
Hmm.
what attracted us there. And I really like that understanding. I think they're still trying to be growing, like grow. Like I don't want to like shortchange my church if they're listening to this. That's not what I'm saying. But like at the like, they only run like, maybe 1,000. Which is big. It's a decent sized church, compared to the denomination I grew up in. But it's not like,
Yeah.
it's not like Willow Creek or something. It's not huge, but it's a decent sized church, and it's intimate, and the services and the sanctuary is kind of tight. It's not huge. It's like decent space. It's smaller than the one I grew up in, which was a smaller church than the church I currently go to. So you have to
Hmm.
do it in two services, and like things are a little bit closer. Not now because we're 6 feet apart, but before that, things were a little bit closer, a bit more intimate. um, and it just fun because like you felt that community. So like, and it was a church where I have for the first time in a long time really liked the whole I'm going to stand in here in the back before the new service starts. I'm just going to chat with my friends or my
Yeah.
friends that are coming to second service. I'm going to catch them on the way in. And that vibe and like that small foyer with like a coffee shop over the side and not being some big elaborate, like, let's get you in there and like shuffle you to these places, like, was really nice. And then, one thing that they do really well is that they have a rotating class that like literally teachers teach the 4 classes that make you a member every Sunday. So it's one of those 4. So you don't have to come all the time. And it's like, generally they bring in like a couple people that have gone through the class or just want to take it again so you can meet people, and they just do it really communal, and it's just really, like I said, it's just really authentic. That was what was attractive to me. So like I agree with you, like, yes, like you should structure it for Christians. And I think that they did that in the service, and then they
Mhm.
have things that aren't service where they help people become part of the thing that's going on. But more to the point, I think that they do a good job of being who they are, and that was so
Yeah.
attractive to me. So when you're asking me, do I think the seeker friendly movement is wrong? I don't know, because I've never been a seeker. I've always been a Christian. Will I say that I see the holes in what you poked in there? Yeah, I think they're pretty glaring. And obviously, like, based on the numbers that we read, it's not effective. Like, it's like not working for our group. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know. Ben, can I pitch you an idea? Can we have a bad idea pitch about seeker
Yes.
friendly? All right.
Yep.
So, seeker friendly churches, in my opinion, based on what we talked about, have been designed to reach Christians that were either burnout or people with religious backgrounds to Christianity. So they had a little bit of
Mhm.
Christianese, so they could dumb it down, like kind of bring you back in and not do the high church stuff. Versus my generation, which is Gen X, and then you could say Gen Z later. We are unchurched people, not burnout church or left church or like not affiliated people. We're
Mhm.
unchurched. Right? We don't know anything about it. Like, our parents stopped going, or we don't have to go because our parents were divorced, and you got shoveled around on Sunday or something. So when you worship us, seeker friendly is different now because we're not seeking fulfillment. We have no concept of it to begin with. So we need to find a new ministry model that uh, finds a way to talk to people and educate them on a language, but bring them into something that is going to seem foreign.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I really like that, and I'm glad you make that that distinction between unchurched versus uh, like burned out, left the church, where you do have some Christianese. This was a tension I really felt when I was in Gagetown because we were in the middle of a culture, and I had to explain this a few times, um, because there is a dynamic shift that happened, which is a lot of people nowadays who are not part of the church, they aren't even a part of a culture that gives them even a rudimentary understanding of Christianity.
Mm,
We would
it's
have
true.
kids come into the church and we talk about, Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit and King David, and they would have no idea what we're talking about. Like even base level awareness. They were just like, what does that mean? What's Holy Spirit? Like what?
You're not
So
wrong.
yeah, and so the approach has to be different, right? It's like, so people are already going to be coming into a foreign culture when they cross the threshold of a church. Um, but at the same time, like, that's not a bad thing because, again, younger generations like ours are very curious. We're interested in that stuff. So it's almost like just make that information available, right? Maybe have a class where you're just like, we're just going to talk about Christian theology.
What we
Like,
believe.
what is it we actually believe? Like, I think there's going to be people who are interested in that. That's one of the reasons we did a series on the Apostles' Creed and then studying Scripture, because that interests
Shameless
us.
plug.
Like we love doing that stuff
Yes.
because like we are very interested in that, not just because of our educational backgrounds, but just because of
I love
I think
history. I
yeah,
do. And I love like learning things about old documents. Like, I'm just curious about my world. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
how do you create from literally the death and resurrection of a man and 12 people, a religion that has basically like fairly been consistent, even though like, and this is probably hard for if we have any non-Christian listeners to understand, but like why is it that Catholics, evangelicals of all colors, right, have core things that they all agree on? Like, how is
mhm,
that possible when we're so splintered and far away? Like, what
yeah.
is that doctrine? Who came up with it? How did it come to be? Like, that's the Apostles' Creed. Do you think that's fair? It's a fascinating thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, somehow we're all the same but different, yet we're like so splintered yet so together. It's like the craziest patchwork quilt you've ever seen. I don't know. I love it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm like really geeking out about the Apostles' Creed again.
No, it's good.
Do you think a
Uh,
teaching style would be more attractive to millennials versus like the traditional like preacher with the dramatic voice and the quips and the things and the that's and all that? And like versus like the calm teaching pastors that we might have seen, like the Francis Chans or whatever.
yeah, I'm tempted to say yes,
I want to
but
say
that's
yes.
also just my personality. But I do, yeah, but I'm also kind of biased because my preaching style is more teaching, and so when I'm teaching, I do a lot better with that than regular preaching. So like the feedback I've gotten between when I've done like more of that, I don't know, evangelical preaching style versus like a lesson, my feedback is obviously tilted. So I don't know. I think I'd be tempted to say yes.
I'm with you.
Um, but but also I think I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that in our experience, in our generation's experience, we are much more familiar with a classroom setting than a church setting. And so that style is more familiar to us. And I think we just know how to respond to that better.
That's a great question. I don't have an answer to that. That's a fantastic question though. Probably has a lot to do with it if that's the case. But I mean, like again, like we're curious. So like when I say preach, this is what I mean. So Ben, you'll have to, as an actual person who does this for a living,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong. When I say
Okay.
preach, I mean that like traditional, like
Mhm.
Billy Graham, like really appeal to like the ethos and talk about the Bible, but not necessarily get into like the history, but talk about what it means and not the traditional exposit, but like kind of more of the exclamation proclamation style.
Yeah. Like you're trying to provoke a spiritual event.
Yes, and you are scripturally based, right? But
Yeah.
like it's not, and it's hard because I think a lot of like there's just so many types of preaching, but like versus when we're talking teaching, we're talking about those pastors that like tend to like maybe more traditionally exposit where they walk through the book and they give you the history and they're like, well, this is what's going on. Here's the Greek word, and like this is what that means, and this is how it applies to us in 2020. And
Mhm.
like, is that what are we on the same page or no?
Yeah, yeah, it's like the difference between trying to help people make a decision versus trying to help people understand.
Hmm.
And it's not, and I'm not trying to say one is better than the other. It's just very different objectives, especially when it comes to preaching styles.
I
Yeah.
That's such a really good wording. Wow, that's really good wording. I was not ready for that. Yes, but I think that would make sense. Yeah, I think that would make sense. So, with that said, can we talk about one elephant in the room that we've left? Because we are,
Uh oh. Yes.
and this is a sticky topic. So, if we need to cut this, we can. But
Okay.
I wanted to talk about what I called cultural disengagement.
Okay.
We did a pod on this about churches nowadays a couple
Hmm.
weeks ago.
Yeah.
Uh, and our kind of take essentially that we kind of came to organically was like don't clout chase but like you know address what you need to address what you can't address appropriately, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
um, One thing that I think our generation is frustrated with is when I say disengagement, uh, I mean lack of acknowledgement, right? When you engage in a conversation, you're there and you're present. But when someone's disengaged in a conversation with you, like that is the number one way to breed contempt. You know what I mean? Like it's so like I had a college professor say it this way, like with an X, he was trying to give an example about like opposites. He's like the opposite of love is actually really isn't hate per se, because like love is this like affection and like most positive. They're like, but if someone hates you, at least it's a strong emotional response. But if they're like ignoring you and they like totally disengage from you, like they basically said you're not even worth their time, and it's like the most
Hmm.
hurtful thing you can do,
Yeah.
and it can really cause a lot of like internal damage. Is what he was trying to get at.
It's like the opposite of love is apathy,
Yeah,
not hate.
exactly.
Yeah.
Or like when like, and you see it in marriages, right? When like couples are like on the ropes, they don't even care about like what the other person's doing anymore.
Yeah.
Like if they hate each other and they're mad, that's a positive sign. That's why they say when you fight, that's okay because like you still
Hmm.
care about talking, but when you're like whatever, it's not even worth it. Like that's a red flag. Uh,
Yeah.
Bad marriage advice, free marriage advice, I guess. But anyway, uh, my whole point is this: that like I think our culture, I think the church culture that we grew up in, and what we're looking for is like acknowledgement of realities and of value and that maybe some things are wrong, being able to call out an injustice when we see it. One thing that's
Mhm.
really interesting about millennials, and Ben, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this, is not, this is going to sound political. It's not. We want you to call out an injustice because even if you're full of Republicans and Democrats, it doesn't matter. We all have a take on the event, but we can
Mhm.
all, what it means is the difference, how we interpret the solution to that event, or if there is a solution. But we all acknowledge that it is hurtful and wrong. And I think our generation is such that they want to have that conversation and they want to
Mhm.
talk about, like, when a terrorist attack happens or when a school shooting happens, like, we get together and we try to do something. Like, we try to, like, send food for the families, we try to pray, we try to mobilize
Mhm.
and, like, care. Um,
Yeah. And I will admit though, that is a bit of a flaw with our generation is that we tend to be a bit idealistic. So it's like when we see a problem, we're like, "Oh, we can fix this. So let's figure out the solution." And sometimes that lends itself to pretty bad
I
solutions.
disagree, but we don't need to
So,
get into that because I don't know if that's going to make for a good conversation.
well, I mean, I just mean like when it comes to more political conversations.
No,
Like,
I know exactly what you mean. I actually, that's what I was saying I disagree with. I think that, like, well, I'll just say it. Like, remember when Jake, we did this in prep a little bit, and if you can cut this, you can. But like when Jake did it, he said that a couple weeks ago on that pod we did with him as a guest, he was
mhm,
like, Jordan, because he was talking about like liberalism and socialism, and he was like, no wonder people have talked about socialism. I raised my hand like jokingly, and he goes like, yeah, the church hasn't given them that sustainment. And I was like, well, that's really disingenuous. Like, we might have legitimate convictions, and we might think that that actually is a solution. So like when you say that, Ben, like, I hear you and I get what you're saying. Like, we are idealistic. I agree with that. But like when you say someone's idealistic and you say it in a pejorative sense, you're assuming that, one, idealism is false, which we don't have good evidence one way or the other if it is or isn't, right? And at the same time, like, I hear where you're coming from because we're also very cynical as a generation, which is a really, really interesting oxymoron and tension that
yeah.
we live in, isn't it? But I think that's part of the reason millennials are the way they are, and they are so active and mobilized, or at least the millennials who tend to think and act like me are, is because we are tired of the status quo, so we
Mhm,
want to push forward. And if we can do that in like a policy way, like an economic or like a political way, we will.
mhm.
But I'm saying for our churches specifically, like, maybe we need to address that too. So like when you say it's a flaw, like, I hear that, like, it can be flawed, but I don't know if it's necessarily a flaw, like, inherently. Does that make sense? I don't want it to be contentious or mean, but I don't know.
No, it's fine. I mean, I'm glad you said that because I think I worded it really
Well,
poorly.
no,
I
I
think the
mean,
point I was
like,
trying to make
yeah.
was more along the lines of um, sometimes we can be too quick to find a solution, and so
Mm,
sometimes our solutions that we propose are not that well thought out.
interesting.
And I was just trying to be like, yeah, I think that's an honest reflection or an honest critique we can give of ourselves. Uh,
Probably.
so that was the point I was trying to make, but I didn't do it very well.
No, that's okay. Like, if you're saying we rush into stuff, like, I think that's probably
Yeah.
true. Um, Maybe part of that is I think we're just used to that kind of busyness.
But I mean, that's the problem with every generation. Every generation wants to rush to a solution, right? Because every generation wants to be known for something.
Maybe.
So you want to just try to make a name. But that's a sort of a meta critique. I'm sorry. Let's
No,
move
no,
on.
you're good. I had to really think about that to, like, actually give you an honest answer about that. Um, I'd have to really, like, I don't know, like, I'd have to really think about that and,
But I
like,
guess okay, so this is actually a good example of one of the things we're talking about, which is we just like to have conversations even if we don't actually get somewhere.
yeah, no, exactly. Like, I'm not disagreeing with you. Like, I'm just like, hey, I want to, like, really reflect on that. Because,
Yeah.
like, my gut wants to say no, but I'm like, but hold on, because I think it's true of my generation. I think my generation in particular wants to make a name of ourselves, and I think
Mm.
Gen Zers, and specifically Gen Zers, think they're one TikTok away from fame all the time. You know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah.
mean. I mean that playfully. I really don't mean that in a mean way, but I mean that in the sense that, like, the way we approach things is like, no, I like, at any moment this could be something bigger.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, I agree with that. I always feel skeptical with boomers because I just
Mhm.
really don't like to put words in boomers' mouth. I just don't want to pick a fight with boomers. Like, it's like, that's really what this is about. Like, I know some listen to our podcast because some comment on our podcast, and I just don't want to pick a fight with a boomer. It's just like, I've been doing it since I was like 18. I'm just tired. Okay, like, I'm just fatigued and I'm worn out. And Gen X, I joke about you guys all the time. You guys are the chillest generation, so I don't have anything to say to you either because I just You're just there. You're
Well, when you talk
chilling.
about boomers, you mean, you don't wanna pick a fight as in you don't wanna get into a generational battle about, like, how we have different values and how we're mischaracterized,
Well,
and
and that's
is
the
that what you mean?
yeah, that's the thing. It's like, so for I think for from like, all right, here's the difference. So like, here's a phrase that you've heard on the news: culture war. You know,
Mhm,
um, I think our generation wants to like address issues, and like we're willing to like maybe make some sacrifices on stuff like words you can and can't say, preferred pronouns, stuff like that. Like however that makes you feel, it doesn't matter. Like we're just trying to address an injustice that we see, and that's one of our solutions, whether it's too quick or too slow, I don't know.
mhm.
Versus like when I felt like historically like boomers have heard that, like that's like an affront to my lifestyle, and it's like, well, actually,
Oh,
I mean, it might be, but only if you're like actively participating and like possibly doing the injustice. So, like, you know what I mean, though? Like, my whole thing, like, I'm not trying, like, I know I'm poking a bear and I'm really trying not to here. I'm trying to tread lightly and doing a terrible job.
mhm,
But my whole thing is like, how do I say this? When you disengage, like, what I mean is just engage with that stuff, man, and like take it seriously and don't get in the minutia of like, no, like get past the anger and the rage. Like my generation needs to be better about that too.
mhm.
But like one thing that our generation is really good at is starting that conversation. Like we're
Yeah.
really good at starting that conversation, and we tend to drive that um,
Mhm.
sometimes to our detriment by not knowing when to stop driving it.
True.
As in you're beating a dead horse, so to speak. Um,
Yeah.
but my whole thing is like I just think that like I just think that like if churches want to engage with millennials, they also need to know how to engage in culture, and they need to be comfortable navigating those waters. Being conclusive or inconclusive, I don't even know if that matters as much for millennials who are participating in church, but they need to be
Mhm.
okay like wrestling with stuff like we just did together. Does that make
Yeah.
any sense? Did I tie that off in any meaningful way?
I think you did.
I
Yeah.
hope
It's
so.
basically just saying, uh, yeah, have those conversations. Yeah, just have those conversations, or at the very least, listen. Like,
Yeah, that's what
don't
I'm
shut
saying.
them
Yes,
down just
listen.
because they might be uncomfortable. Which, let's be honest, a lot of the conversations today are
Oh my
uncomfortable.
gosh, yeah.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And again, I want to go back to, I think the fear that a lot of people in churches have is feeling like if you don't go in a conversation with a beginning, middle, and end already planned out, then you're just opening the floodgates to have groupthink lead you to a conclusion that is totally wrong. And yes, that is a legitimate fear, but our whole point is, our generation at least, we just want to have a conversation. We don't need to arrive anywhere though.
Like we're
And I would even say if we
yeah.
did start a conversation and arrive somewhere, we actually might feel a bit uneasy about that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, because we recognize things change a lot. And it's just, well, can we at least start a
Yeah.
conversation?
And like
Yeah.
I will say this. You're right. Like, we're comfortable in tension. For those of you who are listening that are millennials and you're like, you're wrong. uh, We're generalizing literally like 20 years of people, so cut us some slack. But
Yeah,
like,
we're making a lot of generalizations tonight.
I mean, that's all we have to work on. Okay, so we're trying our best. I'm recording this in my basement, man. Chill out. Uh, anyway, sorry. But like, you're right. Like, I think we live in that tension, or at least historically lived in that tension, so we're comfortable in that tension.
Mhm.
Um, and part of it is like with the social media stuff, like we're constantly like being inundated with new tensions all the time, whether it's like interpersonal like clout stuff, like go here, or like here's my vacation pic, did you take a vacation, like no I didn't because I have a crappy job, like I don't know, like stuff like that, like or even like like this happened, in the news, like how do you respond to it? This is what's going on in this country. This is what's going on in this state. This is what's
Mhm.
going on in your city. And like I just think to some extent human beings aren't made to process that much information. I just don't think we are. And
Right.
somehow our generation hasn't I just don't think we know any better. And hopefully we're the guinea pigs and other people get it right. But like us and Zoomers, just like that's where we live. And like I just don't think that we're designed to do that. So I think that you're finding a lot of millennials are just like they want to get away from that and they want to have the conversation, but they want to
Mhm.
address the topics that they're seeing because that's what's being brought to their attention. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think a part of that too sort of goes into another point.
Sure.
that I wanted to make on this, which I think is the last point I might want to make, which is allowing space for
Mm.
millennials to actually have a voice in that conversation. One of the most frustrating things, I didn't experience this myself, and I'm so glad. I feel bad for the person that actually did this because I know their intentions were good, but just did not come across well. There was a Sunday school class, uh, and the students of the Sunday school class were millennials, and someone who was a from the boomer generation came in, and I'm not saying this to discount boomers. I'm just trying to give context. Came into the Sunday school class and gave a lesson on millennials, like explaining what millennials are, like what their interests are and stuff like that.
Hello,
And it
fellow
just,
kids. You know, like,
yeah, sort of. And it was just kind of frustrating, um because it's like, ugh, it's a bit patronizing, and it's like, but you can't just talk about millennials in your church. Like, you need to engage them. So let me tell you another story. All right, it's maybe sort of tied. I was in a board meeting one time in a church, and I wasn't a member of the board, but I was invited to be a part of it because I had my minister's license, and they wanted to let me experience what board meetings were like, which was great. At one part of the board meeting, they brought up, and everyone in this board meeting, I think the youngest one might have been in their mid 40s, at the time, which was, it is what it is. And they started talking about the millennials in the church. And they're like, so what do we do? Like, how do we approach this? What should we consider? Blah, blah, blah. I had this, they talked for like an hour, maybe an hour and a half about this subject. And they ended on a very vague note. And I was sitting there in the corner and I was getting so frustrated because I'm just like, I'm one of them. Why don't you just ask me? Like,
I'm
why is
literally
no
right
one
here.
why is no one talking to me? Like, maybe that's a better illustration of the point I'm trying to get to here, which is the church needs to, and again, we're being very general,
Give a darn.
churches need to, instead of talking about millennials and Gen Zers, need to be talking with millennials and Gen Zers. Because actually, we want to be involved in the church. It's just, I think a lot of young people feel that they just don't have a place because no one offers them that voice.
Yeah. And I think one thing about a generation that is a good and bad quality, a double edged sword, is that like we want to have a say.
Mhm. Yeah.
But like the bad part is that like, hey, like we want to have a say, so you're gonna have to let us have a say. And I think that's what
Mhm.
threatens a lot of like, in particular, the boomers. I don't know about Gen X, but boomers, I think in particular, are very like
Yeah.
whoa, hold your horses, kind of
Yeah.
with that. Having said that, that also shows you that we have a high level of engagement. So when we're locked in on something, we are locked in on something, right? Because like it means something to us. We put like our all into it, and I think
Yeah.
that's something that like if churches could tap into that, like that little zeitgeist right there, could really drive a resurgence in millennials in church.
Mhm.
I don't know,
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Like, one of the things I did, I don't know if I mentioned this before.
probably haven't.
Have I gotten to the place where I'm repeating stories in a podcast?
I don't know.
When I was a
Tell the story.
pastor, I actually had teenagers sit on the church board. And it wasn't because, oh, we need diversity. It was, well, partly because of that. I was like, I mean, they're members of the church too. I want them to have a voice in leadership. I mean, why not? The decisions that we're making as a church are going to affect them. I want them to have a space to have this conversation too. And
Look at you, talk
yeah, thanks.
millennial talking about diversity. Man, how
Well,
on
the thing
brand is
is,
that?
yeah, well, if any Nazarene pastors are listening, I just want to say it is fully within the bounds of the manual. As long as someone is licensed, and you have to be at least 15 years old to be licensed. I think it's 15. Or not licensed, I'm sorry. Membership, accepted in the membership. As long as they're accepted into membership, they can serve on the church board. Like, not just a subcommittee, I mean, like, they can be board members of the church.
Interesting.
So I did it totally by the book. I didn't bend any rules, whatever. What surprised me though was I was talking with a district leader shortly after that, and they told me in all the churches they'd been to, they'd never, my church was the first church where they saw a teenager on the board. And that made me a little bit proud, but it also was a bit discouraging
Yeah.
to be like, I mean, I get it. Like, churches operate differently. They have different leadership structures. Like, teens do have a voice, but that's in like the youth committee. But it's also like, I do think that's a model that should be looked at in churches of how are we allowing for other voices to have a say. Um,
Well, all
and
parts of
obviously, I
your
mean that
population,
specifically. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean that specifically when it comes to millennials. I think the vetting process can be too strict in some churches
Mm.
where millennials are just not allowed. Like I have heard that conversation too, of people like, well, what about this person? Well, no, because they don't have enough experience in church leadership yet, so we're just not gonna
How do
let
you
them serve on.
Sorry, this is the millennial critique of every job you've ever interviewed for. So like, how do
Exactly.
you get the experience? I'm sorry, like this is so
No, but that's true
God.
though, right?
Like
Like
I
that is
I
true.
just wish boomers would go on Indeed.com and they would pretend that they just got out of college and they would just be like, look at these requirements. Entry level position, 3 years prior experience. What? How? Who is entering in?
Yeah, yeah. So maybe lower those requirements a little bit if you do have very high standards. It's not always a good thing,
Yeah.
but the whole point I'm trying to get to is millennials, like we want a space to have input and at least know that we're listened to. You
Yeah.
don't have to follow all of our ideas, just listen
Yeah.
because we do have,
That's a
yeah,
good
we
starting
just want to be
point.
listened to.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would say, and I will say, and maybe be willing to like give one a try or two. I would
Yeah.
push the envelope a touch further than Ben because I'm just a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe I'm just more aggressive. I have no idea. But like, even if it flops, it's a learning lesson and an illustration that you can point to that group and say, hey, maybe we need to try something different. But you've
Mhm.
included that group, and now you've got ownership and like equity. They have an equity stake in it, and that's a big
Mhm.
deal.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
lose a
I
battle,
mean,
win
but
a
I do
war.
think, yeah. I mean, I will admit, like, I understand that there's hesitation with allowing younger people into positions of leadership within the church and allowing them to have a voice because, well, what experience do they have? Um, However, I would say one of the things a lot of people don't realize about our generation is we are incredibly entrepreneurial. Like, there is a very interesting amount of like multi-million dollar CEOs who aren't even 30 years old yet. Like we are very ambitious people. And so I just want to put that out there. Like if you don't have millennials serving in your church because you are not letting them have a space, like you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like for real. We're not stupid.
Yeah, I think that's true. Um, I don't want to end on a downer, so I'm just gonna say, yeah, I agree. Give us some space. I promise it won't be as bad as you think. And not all change is bad change. And realize that the change that I think our generation is trying to push is
Mhm.
because we want that space and because we think we might have a solution to the problem that we're all agreeing is a problem, which
Yeah.
is church is not growing and the I don't want to say the power of the church, but like the reach of the church is smaller.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And it's engaged with less people as the generations get younger. And so I think a lot of people are afraid of like the secularism in America. What I think would be a great antidote to that is to go to the people who are secular and figure out why. You know what I mean? So I don't
Yeah.
know, as the generation that's leaving you, like, why are you leaving us?
Right.
Sorry.
Exactly.
Sorry.
No,
Common sense, I guess. I don't know.
yeah. Well, what a lot of this boils down to is if you're concerned about the number of millennials that are leaving or have left the church or the amount of millennials that are just not involved in the church, the solution is really not that complicated. If I could propose a solution,
Sure,
so to
sure.
speak. And it's just that maybe this isn't really a solution, but just keep this in mind. Like millennials, we just don't want to be passive participants in something. Like when we go to church, we don't want to just sit there and listen. Like we want to be involved in some way.
No, you're exactly
I
right.
mean, I guess that's how I'd sum it up is just to leave it at that. Like we want to be involved
Yeah.
in what we're doing.
Yeah.
And the truth is we want to be involved in the church. Like I don't know if I've really met a millennial that's just I mean, yeah, you do have some that just don't care and they're just fine being passive, but a lot of people like they want to be involved. They want to have input. They want to serve on leadership. It's just, allowing that space.
Yep.
Well, that'll do it for our conversation this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know your thoughts either in the comments down below or on social media. If you like this, let us know by leaving a like. Be sure to share and subscribe. That would really help us out. I was interested looking at the stats. A lot of people who watch our videos are not subscribers. So please subscribe to stay up to date on
Hit the
new videos that come
subs.
out. Yeah, and also let us know what you'd like us to talk about. Sometimes Jordan and I get together and we're just throwing around ideas like, I don't know, what should we do next? What's interesting to us? But we also want to know what's interesting to you. Like, what are some of those conversations that you guys are having that you find interesting at least? Maybe we'd find it interesting too, and we'd talk about it. So let us know that way. You can contact us either on social media or email. All the information's down in the description. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next time.